Hi, everyone. Before we get started, I just have a couple super quick announcements. The 2-year training programs, the Jungian Psychotherapy Program and the Jungian Studies Program, will be accepting applications starting on January 16th. We have a rolling application process, so after the first 30 applications are submitted, we will then start putting together a wait list. So if you would like to be considered for the program, apply as soon as possible. And the entire program is currently in person, and more information about that is available on our website. Finally, I wanted to let you know about an upcoming program, Community Day 2023, Entering the Magical Realm, Enchantment, Wonder, and the Way of Marie-Louise von Franz. It's on March 18th, 2023, with Steve Buser, MD, one of the co-editors of Chiron Publications and of Marie von Franz's collected works. So he's going to be in Chicago speaking on that all day, and we'll also have a panel and some small group discussions and other things. Registration is not open yet. There are still a couple things that need to be finalized before we open registrations, but that will probably be finished within the next week or so. So keep an eye on the website, and also join our mailing list if you are not already, and you'll receive emails when programs open and that kind of stuff. And you can do all of that at our website, jungchicago.org. Okay, thanks. Welcome to the Jung Anthology podcast from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Entering the Path, The Journey of Individuation with Andrea Gaspar Gonzalez and Daniel Ross. When life is about to branch in a new direction, the unconscious sends us signs and symbols to tell us we're embarking. This episode features Jungian analyst Dan Ross and Andrea Gaspar Gonzalez, talking with host Patricia Martin about the ways the unconscious cooperates to guide us on the path of individuation. As co-directors of the Jungian Psychotherapy and Jungian Studies programs, they share poignant personal stories to explain the mysterious early signs that a new direction is being called for in the process of individuation. They've been on the podcast before, so I'm not going to read their bios, but they're in the show notes, and let's just get right into it.
Welcome to Jung in the World, a podcast of the Jungian Anthology channel of the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. I'm Patricia Martin, and I'll be your host today as we talk with Andrea Gaspar Gonzalez and Daniel Ross. They are core faculty and directors of the C.G. Jung Institute's Jungian Studies Program and the Jungian Psychotherapy Program. And they're here today to talk with us about a pillar concept of Carl Jung's theories, which is individuation. We'll get into that a little bit more, but let me introduce them to you. Andrea Gaspar Gonzalez is a clinical psychologist practicing in Chicago with a focus on the treatment of trauma and sexual abuse. She's a recent fellow of the Jungian Psychotherapy Program and a graduate of the Jungian Studies Program at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Her current research is focused on the collective psyche, application of Jung's theories to the present cultural climate, and re-examining archetypes, especially as they relate to the feminine in a new era of feminism. Daniel Ross has been a nurse and especially a hospice nurse for over 30 years. As a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, he brings both a medical and a psychiatric experience to the field of end-of-life care. He is a Jungian analyst at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago and is in private practice as a psychotherapist in the Chicago area. Welcome, Dan and Andrea. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today to talk about individuation.
Thank you, Patricia. It's great to be here.
I gave this topic a lot of elbow room as I was thinking about all the various ways that we can talk about individuation. But I guess the place to begin is, what is individuation? How would you explain it?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that ever since you sent kind of the idea of the focus that you wanted to be. Individuation for me has been that very mysterious thing in which I have my own interpretation of that based on my clinical work and based on my readings of Jung, and depending upon where you're reading Jung in terms of individuation, and at what point in his writing did he start using that term, and then how did it evolve over the decades that he worked. It's a very interesting thing. For me, it's always been around transformation, another word, in which at some point, probably in my late 40s, I had reached a point, and Mark Winborn was talking about this too, that he experienced the same type of thing. It was a depression in which everything became colorless in my life around that time. I was working in hospice. I was, very productive. I was a clinical director, but everything in my life in the outer world was colorless. And all of a sudden, I started experiencing these strange things. I had an image of a old shed in a farm, a barren farm, because it was probably the fall. Everything was shorn down. I was driving from St. Louis to another city that was in my territory of hospices to visit. That image did not leave me for the next 2 years. And it wasn't until I was in the JPP program and I was studying Jung directly and in the material that I came across a passage in Marie-Louise von Franz's book on the puer, that in her statement, it hit me that the image that I had seen 2 years previous and why it stuck with me and grabbed hold of me was explained in her writing, and it was a perfect match to the image. And so that image grabbed me because of its unconscious pull, so to speak. And it was pulling me towards individuation. It was pulling me towards the rest of my life. It was pulling me towards a change in career. It was pulling me towards a sense of wholeness and completeness, which he would describe as the goal of individuation. But it was all emotional. It was affective. It was grabbing me. I was sitting in boring executive meetings, talking about the same stuff that never amounted to anything. That's what happens in those meetings. And this image would not leave me. It would appear, and I would try to get rid of it. And I would get mad at it. I go, why don't you leave me alone? You're a benign thing. You're just nothing. What do I have to do? Go back to that farm and inspect this image of this old shed? And it really got my attention. And I realized go ahead.
No, it's so interesting. I just want to clarify for a second. So that image first appeared, it rose from your unconscious in a dream? Or
no,
did it?
It was a real life image. It was a real life image. And I had to ask myself, was that image created for me? That's how powerful this image was. What is that image doing there? And this was the dialogue I had in my head. What is that? I got to go back and see if it was there. Did I imagine that? Because I only saw it. I was driving on a highway. I saw it for a second or two. And I'm going, why is this otherwise benign thing in the world grabbing me in such a way that it is? And it led me on this journey that allowed me an explanation. And Jung talks about the symbol as having this energy, this life of its own. And it holds this energy until we discover its meaning. And then once we discover its meaning, it loses that energy, and it's no longer a symbol because it's no longer alive. And so for me, it was experiential. I had to figure out why this image is bothering me. Why is it disturbing me? Why is it not letting me go? And that's the best experience I have to explain a beginning of a very long journey now.
So that image was kind of laying the breadcrumbs in front of you of what would be a journey toward the next version of you, the next iteration of you. But in order to get to the other side of that next you, there had to be a transformational process.
Yes.
And that's what kind of led you to pursue Jungian analysis, Jungian studies. Yeah,
Absolutely.
So interesting.
Absolutely. And my life is now, since then, I said I started that with a depression in which I experienced everything in the outer world is colorless. Now my life is full and vibrant, and I don't experience the world in that way anymore.
No, that's also, well, it's not only interesting, it's hopeful, because I think, we're talking to people out in our audience, and many of them in these times, it's I think pretty apparent to Jungians and people in the civilization, we're undergoing a transformation, and the wheels might be grinding slower or faster at any point. But we're all starting to feel the tug of this. And so the hope of individuation is you're going to go through something, but the prize on the other end is an aliveness, a vibrancy, a feeling more whole.
Yes.
I want to ask you, Andrea, give me your thoughts on individuation. How do you see this?
Yeah. It's very interesting because it's, as I was sitting with that idea of talking about it and thinking it over, I realized that I actually have some questions about it, which I always find, I love questions, obviously, being a psychologist, and being a researcher, and trying to think of things, noticing if something sits, kind of raises my attention. Well, how do I sit with that? So I've been thinking about the individuation process and wondering about that in terms of what that means in these days, both as the individual and the individual within the context of the culture, and how that impacts individuation, and also how it is part of the process. So I've been thinking about individuation and how it really is, this movement into, the who and what, as I think Murray Stein put it, we are meant to be, right? But so there's, I think though, with it, my sense is that there's both a return and a movement forward. And that some of the things that we are in our whole self that have been split off in time or put into shadow, that we are rediscovering. And as we go through this process, able to decide what we take along with us, moving forward into our different potentials and into our growth. But that there's this process that occurs at the same time of moving towards a return at the same time of moving forward is something that's been stirring for me. But that also it's within the culture, and that's our process is we're not separate from it. So while we become our own separate people, I think the individuation process is tied to the collective and what's around us. It's the soil that the acorn is planted in, and that matters very much. So that's something that's been sitting with me, and I have questions and discoveries that are ahead in terms of how I feel about individuation or think about it. So I've been kind of, since this topic's been raised, actually it's raised some questions for me as well. So thank you for that. I always find that to be a great part of the work that we do.
And to tell you the truth, it's one of the things that makes the Jung Institute of Chicago such an exciting and vibrant place is that it's a place for query. It's a place for open conversation. Everyone continues to discover new things. I mean, we've got analysts who are octogenarians, and they have devoted their professional lives to the study of Jung's work, and they are still asking questions. So it's fun to be in this conversation today because we're talking about big things. And I had a question as I was listening to you, Andrea. Okay, so, there's that saying that, when the student is ready, the teacher arises. Or, God never gives you more than you can handle. And these all kind of speak to timing. And I was thinking about that in terms of timing of individuation, like a transformational process. Do you think that it arises for a reason? Like, is it happening at a juncture in your life because something else is occurring? Or, what's the timing around this? What's your thought?
That is an excellent question. So I think in regards to timing, both, right? It occurs when there can be the juncture of things occurring, all right? Or suddenly you have space perhaps that you didn't have in your life before. I'm a mother, I have a young child, and boy, I tell you, sometimes the space that I would like to have to be able to work with my unconscious isn't always there. And I have to be patient with that process. And at the same time, while I might not be conscious of the individuation process that's occurring, I think it's still occurring, right? I think that it is both a conscious and quite an unconscious process. And I think my own experience kind of beginning the journey was very much that way. In that I was, it wasn't that I just had a moment of like, I'm going to embark on becoming a psychologist. I was at a point in my career that it was very, if things were fine, I was doing kind of theater, was sort of what I was trying to engage in the evening. And during the daytime, I was working over, admin type positions. And it was a very stable time. So it was kind of quiet. But I wasn't really thinking about, how do I grow in a different kind of way, or my transformational process, which is something emerged quite suddenly from the unconscious of saying, well, this is the path you're going to take. And thankfully, I guess I was foolish enough to say, okay, well, let's embark on that path and see where it goes. So I think there are things that are occurring that we're aware of at the time, that we can work with, we can bring our ego to and work with in a conscious kind of way. But I think all the time there are things stirring under the surface that's helping to move us there in different tempos and in different depths at different periods of time in our life. So it's one of those famous it depends and both.
Oh, right. Well,
I like the image of the fool. I like the image of the fool, the foolishness of it.
Oh, the fool, yeah.
Because you really have to let go of the egoic attitude, that you're going somewhere, or that you have to go somewhere, or and so when you start realizing you're listening to a whole different reality, and even if it feels foolish, you're willing to go after it because it's smarter than you.
Right. Willing to, or sometimes taken along.
Yes.
Sometimes it doesn't, you're going to go either way.
That's right.
You can go gracefully or kicking or screaming.
That's right.
Right. And I really zeroed in as you were talking about this, Andrea, to this idea of the acorn. There are different theories of identity formation and who we become and why we become that. And I was reflecting on Maurice Stein's discussion of the acorn theory of individuation, and that we have a seed within us, and that seed contains a whole tree that will eventually blossom. So a lot of the anxiety that we feel about decisions as we move into transformation, it's all encoded. But then there's another, there's another theory, and it's very strong in the culture. And that is that hero's journey thing, where there's a calling and it's a quest. There's a scary quest. So what do you think of that? Is it more acorn than it is quest, or can these two ideas happily coexist?
I think it's both, and many other things. I think those are metaphors that are used. Interestingly, synchronistically, Mark Winborn's whole weekend training this past weekend was on metaphor. We use metaphor to try to relate an experience that we're having to another experiential context that then helps us embody the experience and be able to feel the experience and be able to explain. So the acorn theory is a wonderful image of the soul, and that there is something there from the very beginning that then that we go through life discovering, that relates to the environment, that is changed by the environment, but there's some coreness to us that is trying to discover itself in the world. And so that's one theory. But the myth theory is another metaphor, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a metaphor that's ubiquitous. It's not in one culture, it's in many cultures. It's been throughout history. And when Jung talks about the collective unconscious, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about all this rich history and literature and art and all of that's produced from the beginning of mankind is available to us in the collective unconscious, and it's simply a matter of being able to engage with it. And that's hard to do in a time, talking about the spirit of the time. The spirit of the time has many obstacles to being able to do that, right? Because we're all headed somewhere. We all think we're headed somewhere, and we got to be on a path, and we got time constraints, and and that gets in the way of engaging with this material.
Oh, I think that's a very interesting point. I was interviewing a kind of a guru in the tech space the other day, and she said, everyone's supposed to be in such a big hurry, and life is never, it's full throttle every day. And I have never wasted more time in my life.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yes,
right? True. Yeah, oh God, I'm on YouTube and it's, I've been here for an hour and a half. What's going on, Yeah. So I want to take a minute to have Dan, I want you to just explain, if you can, who Winborn is for our audience.
Yeah, Mark Winborn was invited, and he's been to our institute a couple of times. He comes from Memphis, the Memphis Institute. He's a well-known, world-renowned Jungian analyst. He's quite popular right now because he's bringing in some theories regarding interpretation into Jungian analysis and the Jungian analysis world that's been very helpful. It's a new dimension. He's very well read, very clinically sound in his work, and so he came to our analyst training program weekend, and has been and was very embodied. So the whole weekend we were talking about metaphor, and he was using that to describe how we work analytically. So he's somebody that, the JPP program too, we're bringing in new analysts. This year, we have Mark Sabin is going to be coming in from the UK through telecommunication to our JPP people, but that's bringing in a well-known Jungian analyst from the outside to help us understand Jungian theory and to provide a greater dimension to that. So So I'm fresh off of a Mark Winborn experience, and he's written several books. His last name is Winborn. I encourage people to look him up. He's been very helpful.
Andrea, I know you wanted to jump in on this idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I agree with what Dan said. I think that these are metaphors. There are other metaphors that describe it. I think the acorn theory and the hero's journey, that these aren't, they're not mutually exclusive, right? So, and I'm thinking too about, as I think about individuation, and something that I touched on kind of was starting to stir in pre-pandemic, but then of course the great interrupter of all things, right? And so the thought kind of went away, but wondering about what this individuation process, or what the hero's journey would look like, from a feminine, a standpoint of the feminine, or a feminine individuation journey, and would that maybe be different? Where the hero just,
I think it is.
Child cries from the surface, and then we'll come back up, and then we go down again, right? So it's a different sort of process, but I was thinking about it too in terms of the relational aspect, right? And this is something I come back to, and I'll probably come back to during the interview, is that with where would Frodo be without Samwise, right? His journey, right? That we are relational as we go through this individual process. And it's maybe not as individual as we think, right? These things are necessary. Samwise is necessary for this journey, which we talk about, right? I think it's talked about when people talk about the hero's journey. But that it's not a side character that's with us, but someone that is really truly a main part of our story. Just as with if someone who happens to be a mother is going through that cycle, the child crying, right, from above ground to grab your attention is part of the journey. So where I think about the acorn, and the acorn that goes in the ground, the soil, or the rain that comes from above, right? Or the tree that might shade that spot so the ground doesn't get too hot. I don't know much about kind of how the optimal conditions, right, for acorn to develop into a tree, but they exist because there's this connection of this process within the whole already. So
right.
The acorn contains the whole, but it is also part of the bigger.
Yes. And when you just touched on this idea of seeing the hero's journey, for instance, through a feminine perspective, I remember talking on the podcast with Maria Tatar, who wrote the book, The Heroine with 1,001 Faces. And her conclusion is she looked across the heroines in mythology. They didn't have what you would call a hero's call. They had an epiphany. An epiphany is fundamentally numinous. And so I want to talk a little bit about the numinous quality whether it's a calling or whether it's an epiphany, something happens that tells you you're about to go into this journey of transformation. Can we talk about that for a little bit and maybe give us some personal examples of what an epiphany feels like as it relates to this business of individuation?
Yeah, I would go back to my image. I'm going to clarify a little bit. To me, epiphany is when I discovered the meaning or the meaning of the image was made discoverable to me. That was an epiphany. I broke down in tears when I realized that meaning, because holding that image for all that time was like giving birth, right? It was like holding something that had to be completed or finished or brought to consciousness, and that happened, and it happened without any of my it happened because of my pursuit, but it happened of its own accord in its own time. And so the numinosity that you're describing for me is the energy that image held for so long. The energy, the desire to know it, the desire to the disruption in my life, the calling of it, just the way it captivated me until its meaning was revealed. That to me, that's the distinction. The epiphany came later. Yeah. The numinosity was in the image itself.
Yes, that makes abundant sense to me, and it calls me back to the writer David Foster Wallace. He said, "Life will have its way with you," and I think the same that you could substitute individuation will have its way with you, one way or another. And so, Andrea, I'm curious to hear from you about this idea of numinosity. That there is a palpable spiritual energy that enters in to let you know the point of embarkation. Yeah. Is that first of all, is that a fair way for me to describe numinosity when it comes to individuation? Am I making sense?
You are making sense. And I wonder, thinking about what Dan said and kind of thinking about my experience as well, if people experience, well, obviously, right? People experience things in different ways, but how they might experience the numinous in relation to an epiphany, right? If they do come at the same time, or if maybe the numinous guides us to an epiphany, right? It sounds like, Dan, and I don't want to overtake your image or process.
Oh, go ahead.
It sounds like the image was numinous.
Yes.
But it led you to this epiphany, if I'm understanding.
Yeah.
And I think that's true, that sometimes it comes before to lead us somewhere, or maybe it comes after to kind of highlight, right, the epiphany that we've had and the meaning it carries. Because I was trying to think, I'm like, gosh, if I experienced that kind of at the same time, and I probably have, but they're not coming to mind at the moment. But things that are coming to mind that, the epiphany of, oh, I'm going to become a psychologist, the foolishness in that. But it has led to a very spiritual process for me and sacred work. And so there's something numinous in the work, and it comes and goes, right? Ebbs and flows. But there's something I didn't know the spiritual nature of that in the moment. I didn't really have a sense of it at all. I just knew this was something that was just like, oh, well, this is what I'm doing. And that felt like an epiphany in terms of like, well, oh, here's the course of my life. So I go along with that. And it has led to, I think, more numinous moments within the field, within what I've chosen to do, of saying like, this spiritual feeling that I get in studying or approaching research sometimes that moves through. I didn't have that at the beginning, but I think it enforces that epiphany, I guess you could say. But I think something that does kind of come through are these moments. I especially think in research, or my mind is sort of geared towards, you might notice, thoughts and ideas and metaphors and imagery. But I actually had an epiphany when you sent out this topic, not quite right away, but I'm sitting with the idea of individuation. And as I've mentioned, kind of having had this sort of questioning prior in terms of, well, what is the feminine hero's journey look like? Like, what is the metaphor, or metaphors, obviously, for women going through this journey, right? What does this look like? How does this look? But I was just thinking about it, and this felt like something that has a lot of energy and also gives me a lot of solace, and that it's like this realization of, oh, this is within context for me as a woman, this individuation process of I go down and I descend, and I'm going on this arc of the journey, the descent. And then this creature from above cries out for me, and I go back up and I attend to what that is, and I come back down. And for a long time, I think I thought it had to be the other way, where I go into the descent, and if I don't continue that arc, that bottom arc of the process in a sort of quasi-linear way, I'm not really doing the process justice. But for me and my individuation process, it has to be disrupted. That is the arc of my life. And so I do climb back up and I attend to what's going on. And I come back down, and it's fits and starts, and this realization or this epiphany, I can feel it in my body. And for me, that's one way I can understand when something, is carrying quite a load. It might be numinous, might be spiritual. And I need to take a good look at it and pay attention. But I think that's another moment I had an epiphany. It makes me think of this, and within this context of individuation. So,
right. Yeah. And I think for many people who come to the Carl Jung Institute, who find it, part of what draws them, I think, and drew me, was I share your as a researcher, I share your issue, Andrea, that my superior function is intellectual and my inferior function is emotional, and it's not it's not really how it's typified for a woman, but there I am, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But there was something in my soul that was stirring, however conscious or unconscious I was. And I had read plenty of Sigmund Freud's work. But what really inspired me about Carl Jung is that even though he was a rigorously trained medical doctor, and he was pioneering this entire discipline of psychology, that he made room for the soul in his work. He made room for the soul in his practice, in his theories, in his research. And I just, I just want to be very open-ended right now and ask you how this soul's journey plays out in your work as faculty at the Institute.
I think that's a very meaningful question. And even just sitting with it, I can feel that working through my body, right? How does soul's journey come into this?
Right. Like, for instance, do you find that that's somewhat of a common denominator among the people who enroll in the program?
Yes.
Are they at one level or another, they're moving down that path?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's, there is, it is soul's work, right? And I think one thing I love about, the JPP, JSP, and I can feel, right, the gladness or sort of that quickening of my soul when I think about that work, is that it is about moving into that space, right, where the soul can emerge, where individuation or the transformation process is held in a sacred way. I think that that's part of the job, right, of being co-directors, is attending to that sort of sacred container that allows the soul's depths to be felt, to be present. And everyone has their own relationship with those depths, with the soul and with their journey, but that we're creating a space that's, I guess you could say, welcoming, right, for that process. And in a way, by creating that space for others to have that experience, it deepens my own soul's work and my own soul's journey. It's not so separate, right? I guess we come back to that relatedness again, right? That the fact that I am in a position, as co-director does not mean that I am also not on that soul's journey. It's not, I'm not up here, right? You can't individuate on a mountaintop. I'm not sitting on my mountaintop saying, here are the things for your soul's journey. It's part of mine as well. So it's deeply meaningful. I think to the participants and how they feel that and experience that. And I think that's that openness to the soul's journey is part of the common denominator.
Yeah, maybe a longing even. Dan, what are your thoughts on this? Jump in.
I was thinking the image of initiation came to me, that there are two components to initiation. It's the initiand that is seeking initiation, and the initiator, or the elder that is willing to initiate or participate in that process. And it requires both. And it requires both to be ready, to have the readiness for that. So part of my journey from JPP through becoming a nurse practitioner, through analytic training, was this long process of initiation, after which it was very important for me to become the initiator, to complete the process, to be the one that is willing to facilitate that process, and that the applicants that come into the program come into it with their own numinous experiences, their own connection to something Jungian that grabbed their attention, just as that image I talked about grabbed my attention. And so when I went into, in fact, interestingly, I'll remark that all three of us have been through the program. In fact, Andrea has been through it twice. I was in it back in the early 2000s, but it was because something grabbed me and I needed a deeper dive into it. And then that began that whole journey. Well, the people in the training program are, coming with that same type of experience. And they're looking for this facilitated, competent, experienced, containment, holding environment for an experience that is very personal, requires vulnerability and openness, and for that transformation to take place, and to be able to facilitate that, as Andrea was saying, is meaningful to my development, to continue my development, to be able to contribute to creating that environment.
Yeah, and that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah, because all transformations have an initiation moment, right? And those can spark a lot of things. But I also want to kind of put on the wide angle lens here for a second and really just look at the culture. And think, when I think to myself, gosh, it's been 60 plus years since Jung's leaving the planet. And what has changed in the culture? What has changed for the collective in terms of how we individuate? What are the influences that are different? Or is this just a classic archetypal process and cultural inputs don't matter so much? What are your thoughts? Has individuation, the context for individuation, changed in people's lives?
I think the context has, right? I think the process is archetypal, right? Like we can talk about initiation, right? Being an archetypal process. The contexts change. But the actual process and how that moves, or its goal, or kind of the qualities that make up that, I don't know if they change. I mean, maybe little specific things, but I think that has more to do with the context. So I do think the context changed, and I think it has an impact, right? But the process is still archetypal. So perhaps how it's activated or how that activation is received varies very much, depending on sort of the context in which you find it, right? Like anything archetypal, there are certain things that will constellate an archetype in a certain cultural context or time that maybe won't constellate it or cause it to arise in another time. That doesn't mean that the archetype disappears, right? But it depends on how it shows up. And I think individuation being an archetypal process, it's the same way. How we see it, how it emerges, what brings it about, probably is culturally specific in some ways.
Dan, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was thinking, Jung's Red Book and his narrative around the struggle between the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths, and how he was aware that he needed to move from this dominance of the spirit of the times, which is always changes, right? But the spirit of the depths is the collective unconscious that he eventually would name and talk about. And I think that's what Andrea is talking about. The archetypal dimension is something that we have to learn a relationship to. And if we don't, I think there's a great deal of suffering that goes on. And I think there's something in the psyche that is trying to get at the spirit of the depths so that we can experience life more fully. And so in one sense, it's the same struggle as it was 100 years ago. In another sense, it just has different clothes on. There's different, the times are different. There's more technology. There's more of stuff. And is that hurt or does that make it more difficult? I can't speak to it. But I do know that, that my experience of working with patients has been, if I were to characterize the struggle, it's moving out of a compulsive existence into a liberated, free, and more embodied existence. And I think that's the struggle. And until that can happen, there's a great deal of suffering that goes on.
That's an amazing carrot at the end of the stick of a process of transformation, isn't it? That it's a journey. It can be a difficult journey, but at the end of the journey, you are freer, you are more embodied, you are more whole, and you're more alive in the world. What isn't really that the meaning of life? Right?
It's a beautiful image.
Yes. And I think we'll end right there. So I want to thank you both for joining us for Jung in the World today. You were just a thrill to talk to and listen to. And thanks, Daniel Ross and Andrea Gaspar Gonzalez, for a wonderful conversation on individuation. And we wish you well.
Thank you, Patricia. This has been wonderful. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you both.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about training programs, archives, this podcast, or to find a Jungian analyst near you, visit our website, jungchicago.org. Thank you to our 2021 donors who gave at the contributing member level or above: the Arlene M. Feiner Trust, Barbara Anan, Arlo and Rena Compan, Judith Cooper, Kevin Davis, George J. Didier, Mary Doherty, Carl and Patricia Greer, Ryan Mayer, Patricia Martin, Boris Matthews, Sue Rosenthal, Diane Sherwood, Debbie Stutzman, Lawrence Chad Tingley, Alexander Wayne and Lynn Kopp, Gerald Weiner, and Ellen Young. You can also become a supporter of this podcast by visiting our website, jungchicago.org. Thanks.